The Multimedia Ninja Podcast, episode 49. Hello again, and welcome to the Multimedia Ninja Podcast, where it's all about surviving and thriving in the digital convergence. My name is Bradford Rogers, and I'll be interviewing some multimedia ninjas who are making things happen in their respective fields, and sharing tips, tools, and insights for multimedia artists and content creators. As always, you can find show notes at themultimedianinja.com. This week, 1000x your productivity. Or would you believe 2 or 3x? As you may know, in this podcast series, my friends and I will be talking about all things multimedia, including creativity, shaping your ideas, and how to be more productive doing it, regardless of what kind of content you're creating. We have got an exciting episode for you today, so what do you say we just let's get to it? Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the Multimedia Ninja Podcast. I have some great news to announce this episode, and that is that we have passed 10,000 downloads. I can't say how tickled I am about that, and I greatly appreciate everybody that's subscribing, listening, writing in, doing all that good stuff, looking on YouTube. And of course, if you are not aware, we have both an audio and a video version of the podcast every week. The audio version, the best recommendation I have is if you have the iTunes podcast app that comes with your iOS 7, 8, something like that, or later. OS built in, you can just go on there and search for the Multimedia Ninja Podcast. And on YouTube, we are, wait for it, the Multimedia Ninja channel. So, greatly appreciate you helping us to get to 10,000 episodes. You are winners. And that brings me to this week's episode of Winners and Losers. Yes, where we say, well, who is winners, who or what are winners, and who are losers. And the winners this week are you guys and gals. I use the word guys to mean peoples, like a musician talking, which I am. So you guys, for getting us over 10,000 downloads, you are winners. Winner! Another winner this week, you can either say it's me or it's Mac Sales / Otherworld Computing. Winner! Because I finally got in my solid state drives and extra RAM for the laptop. Yes, I'm very grateful about that. I did mention in a previous episode that we had a lack of memory remaining on the solid state drive on the laptop, and I mentioned, I believe, how solid state drives are plagued by a problem, apparently, whereby once the bits and bytes get written on and off and copied and pasted and used after a certain point, they kind of start crapping out in certain sectors, and apparently that phenomenon is exacerbated in solid state drives, and also is exacerbated by when your solid state drive does not have much space left on it. So this drive here was about 0 space. I had to keep finding things to trash and whatnot just to send files back and forth to our long-suffering assistant, Mr. Sis. And it was just about full. So I was waiting and waiting and waiting for these cool solid-state drives to come in, and they finally have, and it's actually the manufacturer that Mac Sales was waiting on. If you're not familiar, I don't get paid by them, but would love to if you want to throw me some money, Mac Sales guys. But it's Otherworld Computing. They're in Illinois somewhere, and their website, I believe, is macsales.com. They have a lot of cool stuff for people that are Mac owners. And I'm not stuck up about the Mac ownership thing. I actually got into Mac right about the time when I think they stopped being so at the top of the chain for multimedia production. And it just so happens once you start getting into one ecosystem, then you kind of stay there. But I'm really happy that a lot of stuff like Adobe Creative Cloud is agnostic of your operating system. You can do it on Windows, you can do it on Mac. If I had a screaming tablet, I would probably be doing it on that no matter what operating system was on it. But we don't have that yet. They don't seem to be up to spec here. And that goes to what I was telling you about. The MacBook here now has two 2 terabyte drives in it. Solid state even. So there's a lot of free space in there. And also, when I was talking to, I believe it was Doug, that would be Diego in some quadrants, yesterday at the MacSales.com technical support line, he was walking me through starting this puppy up from scratch with El Capitan operating system. And I happened to be bitching to him about the fact that, as far as I knew, you could only put 8 gigabytes of RAM in this puppy. And he told me that although that is the official position of Apple, the fact is that you could put 16 gigabytes in there, and Mac Sales just happened to have a kit, meaning 2 8 gigabyte RAM thingamabobs that I went and put in there. I went and put those in. I went and put the solid state drives in there. This puppy should be screaming now, which is good because I want to be able to use this thing live with Timothy P. Green and for my own gigs as well, where I am using Ableton Live, which is the software I'm using right now for the podcast. I like Ableton Live. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. You can manipulate the Ableton push live or when you're composing. It's really cool. But when you start running plugins and things on this puppy or any puppy, and by puppy I mean computer, you start to really gin up the usage on the CPU, and you don't want it crapping out on you in the middle of a gig. So to that end, there is one thing I am doing now that I've cleanly installed El Capitan without any other software on here. That is, first of all, I'm being judicious, and well, it's kind of a given once you're starting from the ground up. There were so many pieces of software on there that it's going to take me a while, even if I wanted to install all of them again. The solid state drive, the system drive on there was just so funky, not in a good way, that the permissions were corrupted, things weren't working right, things weren't probably going to work right if I just cloned that drive onto the new system drive in there, which is, did I mention, 2 terabytes. So I decided just to go from scratch, and I couldn't get all the programs that I had on there back on there. It would probably take me 3 weeks of just messing with that, which in a way is good, because what I was getting to is when the programs that I am installing, such as Creative Cloud by Adobe, which is one of my main suites that I use, that and things like Google Drive, which I've put on there, I am making sure in all the options, at least for now, that they are not, I repeat, not automatically coming up when you boot up the computer. If I look at my Studio Mac Mini here on the monitor, I see the menu bar up there is just covered in icons of things, and I've even disabled some of them when I was taping the podcast. But there's icon after icon of things that are running in the background while I'm recording here. So if I were to start using Ableton Push here with a bunch of plugins on Ableton Live here, it would start running up the CPU, and you'd start hearing little crackly sounds, and then I'd have to decide whether I wanted either to have a bunch of delay when I'm running it, which is really confounding, or whether I want to run the risk of the thing just crashing and burning, which I do not. So on the laptop here, I decided anytime I have a choice, and you almost always do on some of these programs, I am saying do not go ahead and install where it's running automatically when you boot up the computer. I can always go in there and tell Google Drive to come up, or Creative Cloud when I want to sync files, or Dropbox or whatever, but by default, they are not running in the background. At least they are not that I can tell. So that is sort of a tip that I can leave for this week. Which brings me to my topic this week. Would you believe me if I said you could 10,000x your productivity? Okay, would you believe me if I said you could 2 or 3x your productivity? Exactly. You probably would have laughed if I said 10,000x, but it's so popular right now. I see all these things like 10x or 20x your results with such and such. It's like a online marketing thing, and maybe that's possible in some senses, but generally I think that might be just a little bit of hyperbole. So I do want to give you some tips this week that I think can boost your productivity. And heck, if you get 150% productivity or 200%, I would call that a win. Winner! So I'm going to talk about some software apps. And before I do that, though, I want to give you my tip, and it's not just mine. I've seen it in a lot of places, and the first place I saw it was actually in Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That has, if you are an atheist or anything, that has a bit of a religious overtone, but the principles embodied therein that I'm about to refer to are extremely valuable, and the concepts he presents of balancing production and production capacity, or as he puts it, the golden eggs that you're producing and keeping the hen healthy that's laying the golden eggs. That is a concept that he gets into, but more germane to our discussion today is the topic of the activity matrix. You may have heard this, but I'll just give you the thumbnail of it. Basically, any activities that you might just jot on a to-do list, if you were to think of what do I need to do this week, today, this month, this year, just start writing. You're going to find that these things fall into one of 4 categories, or according to this theory, they do. So if you had a little chart or matrix where you have 2 columns and 2 rows, which makes basically 4 quadrants, 4 cells, if you will, a little square divided into quadrants. And if you put on the left column, urgent, you put over the right column, not urgent. And then on the first row, you put important, and on the bottom row, not important. There you have the 4 quadrants according to Stephen J. Covey. And just to illustrate, the quadrant 1 is the top left there, which is urgent and important. This is the rent is due tomorrow and you need to pay it. You really don't have a lot of choice a lot of times about these things, but they're also not some of the most productive items. So if you continue down in the left column of urgent, but you go down to the second row of not important, then you have things like phone calls, interruptions, things like that. Those are things that are urgent because they're happening right now and interrupting you, but generally not so important, like most phone calls that aren't scheduled, things like that. If you go up in the top right, you have the important but not urgent items. That's quadrant 2, and that is really where the magic happens. That's things like working out or practicing your instrument, things like that. Self-development items and high-leverage items usually end up in this quadrant 2, which is not urgent, but is important. A lot of times the urgent, important things in quadrant 1 might be put on you by your employer or certain realities like rent, etc. But the magic things in quadrant 2 are generally things that you need to find time, like meditation, those sort of things. Self-development of skills on lynda.com or whatever learning platform you're choosing. Doing an internship. traveling. Those things generally go in quadrant 2, and you have to cut out your time for them. And then I'll just drop down in quadrant 4. The bottom right is neither important nor urgent. That's usually things like television. So my whole point on this is that before we talk about these productivity softwares and things like that, the first thing you really need to do is look beyond effectiveness to efficiency. And there is a difference. You can be as effective as you want, to use an old cliche, cutting trees down. You can have the sharpest saws and an army of sawers, lumbermen, lumberjacks. But if you're cutting the wrong forest down, you're not doing a whole lot of good. So efficiency is being quick at cutting the trees down, if that's your kind of thing. But effectiveness is knowing whether you need to cut trees down or not. We can get really wrapped up in making to-do lists, and there was a whole school of thought around the early 20th century about being as efficient as possible at doing things, and that's great. But you really need to go beyond the to-do list and think, what do I really need to get done? And a lot of things that need to get done are only going to get done in quadrant 2 if you adhere to what I'm going to mention this week in the segment I like to call, What the heck are you doing? That is where I talk about, or usually our guests, if we have one, talk about what tip, trick, hardware or software thing or philosophy or whatever is really rocking hard for you this week, this month, or this year. And for me this week, it goes back to something I was covering last week. I definitely encourage you to check out episode 48 if you have not yet. And as you may or may not be aware, any episode that I mention by episode number, you can just go to themultimedianinja.com/that episode number. In this case, I'm referring to 48, just 48. And that will take you to the episode in question. But as I said, last week in episode 48, I was talking, among other Zen principles about less is more. That goes with what I was talking about this week about quadrant 2 and this whole thing of efficiency versus effectiveness. To do the effective things, to do those quadrant 2 things, sometimes you need to say no to things, to other things. Not just the quadrant 3 important but not, or urgent but not important things like phone call interruptions and salespeople at your door or whatever. But you need to sometimes strike some of the lesser important, lower leverage, less long-term important items from your potential quadrant 2 or quadrant 1 items so that you can get to what you really want to get done. So my thing here is this week I have 2 or 3 paid gigs. I need to wrap those up before I go to the boat on Friday. Actually, if you're listening this on release day, I'm on the way to the boat right now. I am driving along as you are listening to this. But I needed to get everything done. I wanted to do all kinds of things this week on the podcast, but it occurs to me that I need to maybe just do one little tweak per week. That's really we don't have seasons here. We don't have seasonal things where we can go away for a few weeks and come back. So what I need to do is make it to where I can maybe tweak one thing in a week. Maybe I don't tweak anything this week, but I just had to say no to getting a lot of particular things done so that I can get this podcast out, get my paid gigs completed in a high quality manner for our clients. And by the way, you can still hire me for multimedia production and consulting work. Just hit me up on the website. Pleased to see that I'm very busy with that. But so I needed to basically weed out a lot of things that I'm just not going to do this week that I wanted to do. So that is the segment, What the heck are you doing? And now I will move on to the promised software items that I was talking about. Applications to 1,000x your productivity, or maybe 2 or 3x. Maybe 1.5x, but that is a winner in my book. So the first thing that comes to mind, I have used it for years. I have mentioned it way back in the day. And by the way, I will have links to all these things on the website. If you're interested in trying any of them, you can go right there on the website. Some of these I may get like brownie points. Creative Cloud, if anybody clicks on the little ad and wants to get into Creative Cloud, supposedly they pay me a royalty for that. I'm still waiting to see the first period accounting. You would be doing me a solid if you decide to do Creative Cloud, for example, and use the link on the page, but they're there for you. In some other cases, I get zilch, or I have to look to see if there's any link I can put to where I get some credit. Generally, I don't really get much, but you might as well just use the handy links there, and there's certainly no negative consequence to doing so. So help a brother out, will you? At any rate, the first thing that I want to mention as far as applications, and I've used it for a long time, is Evernote. If you're not familiar, I don't even know what they call themselves, but Evernote is basically an application that works in the cloud as well as locally on your computers to store text and image notes, hyperlinks, basically anything that you can snapshot, or even audio notes. You can take notes with your camera. It now does a lot of OCR, character recognition, and will scan. If you scan a text item from a magazine or whatever, it can recognize them. But in short, it is my central notebook, and it exists on my mobile devices, laptop, desktop machine, you name it, so that if I'm researching a project or whatever, or just making notes, or I want to save links or do podcast pre-production, I use Evernote for that purpose. It is a very cool application. It is, to my knowledge, fairly secure, and there you go. My knowledge doesn't extend very far about how secure things are or how that works, but I do believe they may, I say may, take your privacy, or privacy as the Brits say, fairly seriously, as well as their encryption. So that would be Evernote. In addition, I didn't even have it on my list here, but I'm going to add it right now, is LastPass. That is an application that I use to remember passwords and things like that, and you can also share them with people that you work with, and you can either allow or not allow those people to see the passwords. But for example, if I need somebody to log into our WordPress, that sort of thing, I can just share with them the LastPass link, and they can do it. I will note that lately I did see an article that LastPass had been sold to a different company, and some people were making some concerns about whether the company that had bought them recently was as concerned about your privacy as LastPass may have been before, or as concerned as you might like them to be. So I would take that one with a grain of salt, and I will just say that it is an application that I do use, and for the moment, I find it to be very handy. Oh. Now, the next thing I'm going to mention is actually not an application per se. It is a script. And this script is, I will have a link on the site in the show notes. I actually did a specific article piece, I believe, on the site a while back. And basically, this script is called Compose Gmail. I probably should have told you what it did in the lead-in, because that's the really cool part. What this script does is, obviously, if you are wanting to write an email, and I use Gmail, I find, once again, in a concession to the NSA and all that sort of thing, I am just probably giving up a lot of privacy by using Gmail, but as I am not plotting any nefarious things, I figure that's probably not a huge issue. So I'm a Google Gmail kind of guy by practice. And what I find, and this is probably true with a lot of emails, but clients, but when I wanted to go and send somebody an email, I had to jump into Gmail or Google Inbox and I had to see all the emails that people were sending me. That's not a great thing for trying to stay in quadrant 2 and trying to do something productive. When you see all these emails, it's pretty darned easy to get distracted. So what this little script does, and if there are instructions on how to do it, it basically uses a thing in your Mac called Automator, and you just have to load this script in there, if I'm saying that right. It's been a while since I did it, but I did it on my, I'm going to have to do it again on the laptop here. But I did it on my desktop, and if you have any questions, just hit me back on this. But what it does, I just type into my little finder now on Mac Yosemite or El Capitan or whatever, or you can create a link to it. But I type in compose Gmail, it executes this script, and what it does, it brings up a Gmail compose window with no other emails in it. Can't tell you how awesome that is. So what I do is I can compose my mail in Gmail, send it off. I don't see any other incoming emails. I close the little window or tab, and I'm using Chrome since I'm a Google kind of guy. It's in Chrome. I suppose you can do it in Safari or whatever else is your default browser. I'm not sure. But again, I'll hit it. I'll just type in compose Gmail, and in my El Capitan and previously Yosemite, I don't know how far back this goes, in the little finder, when I start typing compose, it's the first thing that comes up, compose Gmail. I just start typing COMP, hit enter, comes up, do my email, send it on, close the browser, and Bob's your uncle. I am loving that. I am definitely loving that. So my next thing, this goes to a lot of the work I'm doing with my long-suffering assistant, Mr. Sizwe Gobashe, a.k.a. Siz. And also a lot of things I'm doing with file backup, which is critically important. But this app is one that used to be PC only and is now PC and Mac, which I'm grateful for. What it does is allow you to compare two folders, whether they're on different drives or what have you, or you can compare two whole different drives, but it will check to see which files are, not only which files are on one and not on the other, if you're trying to keep copies synchronized. It will also tell you which ones are older or younger or larger or smaller, and you will be able to correctly synchronize your files. If I didn't mention, it is called Beyond Compare. I love it. I've been using it for years, and one of the really cool things about it is their trial period on there is just crazy. It's like a 30-day trial, unlimited functionality, but the way they measure the 30 days is really cool because they only time your days based on days that you use the software. So if you use it once this week and once next week, that's 2 days out of your trial. And when you finally get to the end of that trial, I think you'll find that it's well worth the like $45 or whatever that it costs to get it. So highly recommend Beyond Compare. Again, this will be in the links in the show notes. Not sure how to get any royalties out of them, even if I possibly could. Anyhow, the next thing I want to talk about is something that we use here at the Multimedia Ninja for our internal communications, and that is Slack. You may have heard of Slack, and this kind of relates to the whole compose Gmail script in a way. This is an app, not a script. Slack is an app or a software as a service kind of thing. But what it does, kind of like the script I mentioned, but in a different way, is lets you communicate with your team without going into your inbox. You start using email to communicate with your team. It's just really a time suck. It's distracting. Again, you have to look at all these other emails. And again, I keep saying again, but my practice is to try and only look at email maybe twice a day, if at all possible, unless I'm interacting with a client that can't use Slack or something. Maybe check email at noon, check it at the end of the business day. Let people be aware that that's my practice. And meanwhile, I am trying to focus on productive things for myself or for clients in between and being as productive as possible. And to that end, we use Slack here at the Multimedia Ninja between myself and Siz so that we can have conversations, post notes and video notes and documents and things and share those without having to dip into the whole email mess. So that's what Slack is. I have a link to that in the show notes, and I'm been very stoked about that. One more thing that I've been using, I've been giving Sis a break on this one, but myself, I use it. It is basically sort of a, what would you call it, a pinboard for ideas and things like planning shows and things like that. It's called Trello. And Trello is very cool. Postboard, is that the word I'm looking for? But basically, lets you put little virtual cards up on your screen for ideas. You might do it for your household. You might do it for work. You might have a card like for podcast production. I may have potential guests on one card. I may have topic ideas on another card and that sort of thing. So I find that really handy, and I've been using that a lot. So there's a link in show notes to Trello, and I think you may find it amusing and try it out for yourself. It is definitely handy for certain things if you're inclined in a visual way to sort of map things out. So last but not leastly, I want to talk about what might have been an obvious thing to begin with, and that is Adobe Creative Cloud. That is just by default. I know there are other software out there for video, for illustration, for motion graphics, for web design and development, for photo enhancement and artwork, but I have never found a whole suite that is just as crazy productive as Creative Cloud. I had some trepidation about when they went to this whole cloud and subscription model, because I had already paid for the whole, what used to be called the Master Collection back in CS3 through CS6 or what have you. Spent some good money on that, so I didn't want to pay to rent a service or a bunch of apps that I already had. But there are so many freaking apps right now that Creative Cloud is putting out that it's like, I don't know, 30 or 40 apps you get. And every time they do a new app or update one, you get access to that free. You can either do it, the main subscription is like $49 a month. You can stop paying at any time. You just won't be able to use the applications to open your work files or what have you. They also have I believe a student plan for $19.95 if you qualify for that. And they have a plan where you can choose, I think, maybe Photoshop plus one other app or something like that. It's kind of a la carte, and it's priced in there maybe at the $20 something. I just get the whole thing for it's either $45 or $49 a month, and I get every app in the whole Creative Cloud. And what's really cool is I'm able to synchronize files. Like for this episode, I will send Sis a Premiere.proj file, a Premiere file. So the minute I'm done, I can upload that along with some audio files and video files to Creative Cloud, and he will be able to work on them, and we can work on them in sync. I can just open up that Premiere file since I have all the video and audio files locally, and I'll be able to look at what he's done, make comments. He can work on it and such, and when we're done, we render that puppy. Now, the couple of things I will mention, there's a 20 gigabyte limit currently on the cloud storage. So when I talk about doing video projects and stuff, collaborating with somebody, you have to make lower file size proxy files of some of this video. You can't, if you're doing an hour-long project with a number of video shots, you're not going to be able to put all of that up on your 20 gigabytes of Creative Cloud space. Easy for me to say, especially if you have more than one project going. But there's a practice, if you're not familiar, in Premiere and After Effects in the video applications in Creative Cloud, where you make things called proxies. And if your footage is 4K and it's 100 megabytes per second or whatever, something crazy, then you make a proxy file that is maybe 960 by 540 and is in a codec that is much smaller in file size. And those things you can use on Creative Cloud. And once you've made your edits, you can just revert back when it's time to render to the full file sizes. Now, I will note we have some craziness going on. Sis and I have noticed when we're doing this thing with proxies that when he works on it and I get it back, I get all this crazy sizing going on Adobe Premiere. And so that is something to watch out for. I'm not quite sure why that happens, but if you're working by yourself, it's not really an issue at all. This is only an issue if you're sharing on Creative Cloud and you're using proxies that are different in file size from your original footage. I just want to mention that. But in general, Creative Cloud is the whole basis for what I am doing these days and enjoying the heck out of. So those are my six or seven, it's 7 now, productivity apps. And remember, if you didn't start by clarifying what your intentions are, your long-term, your high-leverage items, and working in that quadrant 2, none of these things are going to be really as effective as they could be. You may not 1,000x your productivity, but if you get your ducks in a row, work in quadrant 2, and maybe try some of these applications, I think you'll find that you will be more productive. Well, that just wraps up another edition of the Multimedia Ninja. I hope you'll come back next week and bring your friends. Yeah, I am keeping it together today, aren't I? Don't forget that you can subscribe to our email list right there on the website at themultimedianinja.com. Stay tuned next week for our 50th anniversary celebration. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to be doing from the boat, and I'm going to have some awesome stuff from a lot of our previous guests. It's going to be rocking. So until then, have a great week, make some great art, and we'll see you next week. Bye now.